and welcome back to Medical Compliance with Clarissa. I'm Clarissa Benfield, our Global Director and Business Line Leader for our medical and laboratory business here at Intertek. And today I'm thrilled to be joined by one of our newest team members, Cyrus Ahmadi. Cyrus, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Clarissa. Super excited to be here.
Yeah, wonderful. So Cyrus, I think before we dive into our topic, which I'm super excited to talk about today, which is software in a medical device, software as a medical device. As I mentioned, right, you're newer to our team. You've joined our assurance group. Maybe you can just give a brief introduction to yourself, how you got into the software space, kind of what your role has been in the development and regulatory approvals of software.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the past 10 years or so, I've worked in specifically the medical device industry on the manufacturing and development side of things. I got my start in medical device, actually IVD and medical device testing, and then branched out into systems design and design engineering, and then kind of landed happily in more software development and management. And the past couple of years, really focusing in on software development, software testing, like you mentioned, software in a medical device, software as a medical device. By training, I'm a biomedical and computer engineer. And growing up, actually, funnily enough, my dad worked as a software engineer for not a medical device company, but a pharma company doing manufacturing software development, like PLC development. So I actually grew up reviewing test plans and verification matrices and all of those sort of things. So I'm not sure I had a choice necessarily. I think I was kind of primed for it from the very beginning. But very fulfilling career it's been, and work, a line of work to be in.
Yeah, definitely in your blood to be in this space. So maybe we'll just kick it off with something really basic, right? Because I think sometimes we hear this phrase interchange with each other, software as a medical device or software in a medical device. And I think sometimes there's confusion between like, what is the distinction? What makes something software in a medical device versus software as a medical device? Obviously, we're talking about two different things, but of course there is some crossover and maybe some lack of clarity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's kind of evolved in the past couple of years. I'll start with the small anecdote. When I was getting out of college, if you had a application, right? Like if you had a wearable and then you had an application with that wearable, it was quite possible, depending on what that application did, that application would never be really considered even part of your ecosystem or need any kind of regulatory compliance from an FDA perspective. But these days, that's not necessarily the case anymore. And the challenge or the growth that we've seen and kind of how things have to comply is that any bit of software that's going to show or aggregate or bring all your data into one place, that's going to be viewed very stringently by the FDA and other regulatory bodies. The specific distinction that we see, software in a medical device, I think the best example is if I'm building a robot, right, a medical robot, whether it's for surgical applications or a cobot or whatever it might be, that's software in a medical device, right? That's software that's going to go in. It's deployed inside of a larger system, and that larger system is not necessarily, there's the specific hardware designed for it. There's a specific platform designed for it. All of these sort of things. Software as a medical device, that's software that's been developed kind of platform agnostically. Now, again, obviously on your indications, you can say, hey, we only make this for iOS, or we only make this for Android, or I don't know why, but you only make this for Windows. So you can make it for a specific platform. However, the frameworks that you use, the hardware that you use, the product that you package is only software, right? There's not a hardware development sort of concept there. Really, I think a good example here would be the Apple Watch, right? Now, the Apple Watch itself is a medical device, and that's not just software as a medical device. But if I made an application for the Apple Watch, and I'm utilizing the sensors on the Apple Watch because I didn't make that hardware myself, but my application is, let's say, diagnosing for example, let's say sleep, right? And I'm drawing very clinical insights from your sleep saying, oh, you're contributing to higher cortisol levels and things like that. You're at risk for something actionable that could end up in you going to the doctor for it based off how I present that data to you. That would be considered a software as a medical device.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too. So, last week I was at the MedTech conference, and one of the topics, of course, was surrounding software as a medical device and AI, right? There's been a lot of talk in this area because we see more of these types of software only products. But what was interesting, right? The questions come up, and there's a lot of discussions around exactly what you're talking about is not all of it is regulated. And maybe even within your own application, maybe only a portion of it is regulated because that is treated as the actual SaMD versus there's other things that would fall outside of the regulation because they're not necessarily going to be providing any data that's going to be used for a treatment plan or diagnoses or things like that. So I think there is still, some confusion in that space. And we see too, right, a lot of these new market entrants, people who are attempting to enter the medical device field, developing these types of products that have really cool algorithms, really cool technology that they're trying to implement without having any idea about the medical regulations that exist behind that and when something might be regulated and when it might not be regulated.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to honestly piggyback off of that, one of the actual trends I'm seeing as well is companies trying to catch up, right? So your companies that have that legacy product that is specifically just a hardware product, but now they're introducing an application to it. And the regulatory strategy there, I've seen some companies that go back and they submit the whole system as a medical device, in which case software as a medical device ends up maybe kind of going by the wayside because you're doing the whole system. But you don't necessarily need to do that, especially if you're not making hardware changes and if you're not changing your intended use environment. You can develop your application that coincides, and as long as you show your interoperability testing and you show all of the sort of necessary things that you need to, cybersecurity, verification, validation, all of the classic ones that we've come to know and love. Then you can submit just as a software as a medical device. Now you have to kind of maintain the two separately, but that does give you some level of flexibility in making changes and adapting on the fly. But to your original point, I think that we are seeing a really interesting sort of evolution, I'll say, of the medical device industry as health and wellness is starting to kind of bridge that, like blur that line between, hey, what we had originally thought was, hey, this is a cool app for working out, or, this is a cool app, like I said, for tracking sleep. These things are starting to get, people want, and we're getting to a point where we have better insights and we can draw better insights from data. Because A, there's so much of the data, and B, the sensors that we're using are just getting so much more advanced. And I think that we're seeing, to your exact point, we're seeing companies that are coming out and making something that they don't necessarily believe is a medical device, but because of the insights that they're getting, because of the actions that people can take based off the data they're getting now, which is far more advanced and far more insightful than ever has been before, they need to be more responsible about how they go about both developing and then also communicating, or like communications around that data that they're giving in that platform that they're providing.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think this idea that we can't put a box around what is the medical industry anymore, right? We've seen so much growth and just this evolution into all of these new technologies and all of these different types of applications. And to use say health and wellness, like that's moving right into the phase of medical devices, right? It's not just a traditional medical industry anymore. And I think we see this idea that we're focused more on preventative care and early diagnosis and people wanting to take this control of their own health, and all of these types of software applications, wearables, things that maybe, oh, this was a really cool app that someone developed that was tracking this kind of data. And now you can use that to say, oh, I see that if I'm doing X, Y, and Z, this is improving my outcome in some way, right? I think it's pretty remarkable to see how far we've come in such a short amount of time versus, where we were 5 years ago. To look at where we are now is just incredible. And now we're just seeing these new developments and even more advanced types of technology.
Yeah, and I mean we're going to keep seeing it too, right? With AI and ML and the boom that's kind of happening on that side of things. Not that these things didn't exist for the past 10 or 20 years, but just the fact that now that it's kind of at the forefront, the leaps and bounds that we're going to take, it's going to be it's honestly more important than ever for people to be proactive and make sure that they're doing everything they possibly can to ensure that their users or their patients or however they reference them are getting their data or getting their insights in the safest, most safe, well, I'm sorry, possible. Because you don't want to be that company that ends up, or that brand that ends up providing a great product and then all of a sudden something adverse happens and you're not ready for that, you haven't done the necessary things to ensure that's going to be handled correctly, because hey, I didn't want to do it right, or time to market was more important than the quality of the product that was being put out, or you just didn't know, right? um, you don't want to be that company, because that really ends up at the bottom line hurting the brand and hurting that sort of patient or customer trust that all brands are really concerned about building and should be concerned about building.
Yeah, and I think, within this space, right, you kind of alluded to it, but there is some murkiness for these manufacturers of like what actually makes something a medical device, SAMD falling under the requirements. Like, are there distinctions that we can point to that would say, okay, yes, you certainly are a medical device. No, you certainly are not a medical device. Like, how do we, or how does someone as a manufacturer or someone who's developing this type of technology really lean into that and understand? Because there is a lot of, lack of clarity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and it's software, right? So a lot of the times there is just a lack of clarity. My general rule of thumb or guidance that I give when consulting or when working in the regulatory capacity is, if anybody can make a decision to go to, obviously, I mean, you have your obvious ones, right? If a clinician is using your software, you're a medical device, right? If you're doing pathology or diagnosis or anything of that sort, you're a medical device, right? Those are the traditional ones. But to the point, and the kind of, I think the trend that we're talking about in health and wellness, if I'm able to look at your data that you're giving me, and it is hey, oh, I need to go to the doctor because this came up, or I need to stop doing this or start doing that because this came up. I would say you kind of have a responsibility to be a little bit more on the medical device side, to ensure that you are doing everything you can to make sure that, I think from the FDA's perspective, they don't want people getting incorrect insights. They don't want people getting any kind of privacy data, health, PHI out there, and they don't want people making decisions based off data that's going to take a load on the healthcare system, right? I think those are the things, at least in conversations with both industry professionals and FDA professionals, those are the things that they're really looking at. And sometimes, you make something and you fly under the radar and nothing happens, and that's okay, right? That's fine, and that's okay. But sometimes bad things happen, sometimes adverse events occur, and at the very least you want to show that you have seen that, or you have planned for this sort of thing, and you have a path forward. And that's really what being a medical device means, right? You've thought about, okay, how can my product impact the safety of my patients or my users? How am I going to respond if and when that happens? um, and you're putting in mitigations where, and quite honestly, maybe I'm biased because I've been in medical devices my whole life, but if you really are concerned with putting out a quality product, you should be doing this anyway. It's not really any more than I think should be happening. If you're trying to draw health insights to people, it's not any more than you should be doing. And that's what I hear from people. That's their aversion to going the medical device route. or following medical device standards is we don't want to have to do more. It's like in a lot of cases, you're not really doing more. You're just doing what you should be doing in the first place to put out the highest quality product you can and the safest product you can. And now with the new guidance is the most secure product that you can.
Yeah, and I think we can talk a little bit about that, but I think you've alluded to a couple of things and maybe we can just peel back that a little bit, right? So I think understanding early, right, looking at your target markets of where you're trying to go, the regulatory agencies that you're trying to submit to, the geographies, right, trying to determine, because we do see there are guidance documents, there are requirements, right? There are devices that are already cleared that are SaMD, right? So it's easy to kind of put together that regulatory pathway, but obviously working early and plotting that out. Are there other tips that you would give people, pitfalls that you see, things just from your own experience on the industry side, going through this process, working with the different regulatory agencies to get these types of products approved?
Yeah, I think you hit them all on the head. I think maybe even claims that you want to make, right? Getting your marketing team involved early on to understand where what they expect to be able to say about the product, and then supporting that, right? Or pulling that back if you need to, right? Because the claims that you make could essentially determine, hey, I'm a class 2 or I'm a class 1 or I'm a class 1 exempt. I mean, that's that. And all of those regulatory strategies are significantly different in the effort that they take when it comes to, and the timeline when it comes to interfacing with the regulatory bodies. Not necessarily, again, I'll hark on it forever, right? Not necessarily in the processes and procedures that you have to follow, although some of those claims will require clinical trials. And that's a whole thing in and of itself. But yeah, I would say you hit the nail on the head with intended use, intended environment, and then your claims around your product. Those are your really core things that are gonna tell you, hey, this is definitely a medical device. We need to make sure that we're doing everything to comply with medical regulations.
And you mentioned it a little bit, but of course, we've seen like the FDA has a guidance that's out, right, in terms of software as a medical device. Are there other things that you would point people to, resources, things like that from a regulatory standpoint that you've seen? Or do you really think that just, following the guidance and leaning into what the FDA has prescribed is the best route? Specifically, if you're looking at the US, obviously, if we're looking outside of that, there's going to be other requirements that you have to comply with looking towards the notified bodies or things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the US we're a bit spoiled on the regulatory side of things because, we have a excellent a lot of people scratch their heads on this, but we have an excellent regulatory body in the sense that they make it very clear about what the regulations are, what the expectations are. I know that some people will maybe push back here and say, well, no, the guidances are vague, and they're vague on purpose, right? So that your professionals and the experts in that industry can determine what's best for that product. But I think like when you look at other areas of the world and you compare them to the US, I think that, the FDA like is very clear on what their expectations are, at least in terms of scope. We could say that. There's the International Medical Device Regulators. That's a fantastic resource. I think they're trying to harmonize across
Yeah.
all of the major regulatory areas of the world. So I think those two really are excellent. Yeah.
Yeah, I think definitely, bookmarking the FDA's pages, looking at all the resources they have on SAMD is super helpful, and they are very clear, in what their expectations are. IMDRF, as you said, right? That's a huge resource. I think that maybe people aren't necessarily tapping into enough, right? So you have regulators from around the globe working together because we understand that, healthcare is so important, and getting these types of devices out globally is key. And so they're trying to move towards this idea of harmonization globally with standards, with requirements, with guidances. So they've put out a lot of great information as well. So I think really good places for people to start, right? Especially as they're going through their early process of, okay, identifying where they're trying to go, what they're trying to do, and classifying their product.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
one interesting trend that kind of has gotten a little bit of headway is that we saw Switzerland adopt. I don't, and I apologize, I don't know exactly what the exact phrasing was or what it's titled. But essentially, if you get 510K clearance, Switzerland will let you market your device in there, as so long as you obviously follow the deviations for Europe. But yeah, that so again, I mean, the FDA is no longer, I think there was a sort of feeling for many years that EU was always the big beast, and that the FDA kind of was easier or lagged behind a little bit. But I don't think that's the case anymore. And I think that for all the faults that are there, the FDA has done a very excellent job at putting forth regulations that don't necessarily stifle innovation, but make sure that it happens in a very guided and controlled and safe way. And I think other countries are seeing that. And instead of trying to reinvent the wheel or take it and rebrand it to their own sort of thing, they're just saying, hey, if you follow the FDA's guidance, then we're happy to have you here as well. And I think even when it gets to MDR, and obviously there are nuances, but I think if you follow FDA, I'd be comfortable in saying you're 90% of the way there to comply with MDR. There's, again, nuances, obviously, but
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, it's wonderful to see, right, as an industry in general, right, that everyone is starting to band together and understand that technology is advancing so rapidly, right, faster than standards can advance, faster than regulations can advance. And so it's, how do we merge people from industry, regulatory, right, merging everybody together to say, okay, we're all after the same common goal, which is to get these products that are safe and effective and low risk, or as low risk as they can be, right, to the market as fast as they can, to provide these, better healthcare, better patient outcomes. So really, really exciting to see. Well, Cyrus, I'm sure we'll have further discussions on all things software, SaMD, AI. If anyone has questions, please feel free to reach out and we will connect you with one of our experts for SaMD. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you so much, Clarissa.